All right, we're back to talk about L'Aventure Ambiguë par Cheikh Ahmed Kane. And we've been traveling for a little bit. Kids have been sick, so I missed a couple weeks, but we're back. And last time we were here, Samba had lunch with Lucienne's family and discovered a lot of commonality with her father, but also the fact that even the church in the West had come not to believe in the power of the gospel message itself without the accompaniment of medicine and engineering and all of the blessings of the modern scientific Western world. Well, Lucienne was at odds with Samba, and that was also the first clear cracks in their relationship that would show the impossibility of them staying together. Just before our first excerpt today, Lucienne let Samba Diallo know she has joined the Communist Party of France. And she kind of lays out her goals, her worldview of her Marxist idea of what the world needs and where the world is going. And Samba's reaction to that is the following. You have not just raised yourself from nature. Here you have even turned against her the sword of your thought. Your battle is to subject her, is it not? As for me, I have yet to sever the umbilical cord that makes me one with her. The supreme worth to which I aspire, even today, is to be her most sensitive and filial part. I dare not fight her, being her very self. Never do I open the womb of the earth, searching for food, but that I first ask forgiveness with trembling. I fell no tree, coveting its body, but that I ask it as a brother. I am just the tip of being where thought buds. Oops, I done messed up. In the West, since the scientific revolution, there's been a stark divide between the material world, dead stuff, and the reasoning world. I mean, even animals in the medieval world were considered to have souls, but reason becomes a stark divide in the modern era. Humans have reason. We're the ones who can sort of abstract ourselves, at least conceptually, from the world and look at it like an observer, as if our consciousness was not impinging upon the process of observation. So for her, she sees humanity as sort of a purely separate and controlling thing, rather than intimately tied to creation, to nature itself. This is very much a modern thing where nature and humanity, nature and culture, nature and society are separate things. Nature is what happens when humans don't intervene. Therefore, humans, by definition, are separate from nature. For Samba, he is part of the whole show. He's part of nature. He is a child of the earth. He calls, she is her very self. He is her most sensitive and filial part. He asks forgiveness with trembling when he opens what he calls the womb of the earth in search of food. He calls the trees his brothers. Reminds me of the lyric from Josh Garrell's song, brother sun, sister moon, all children of light. I think St. Francis of Assisi also refers to aspects of the natural world as our siblings, as created things. But then he says this most interesting thing that touches on the reason bit. I am just the tip of being where thought buds. For him, being a human endowed with spiritual reason does not divorce him from the rest of the cosmos, but it makes him sort of the bleeding edge. I am the tip of being where thought, where reason buds. And so all of creation, in some sense, in being what God created it to be, renders praise to him. And then man has the capacity to see and understand and reason and willingly render worship to God. Clearly, he and Lucienne have found some irreconcilable differences in their approach to the world. She considers his position, his perspective on things naive. she thinks that all this about, being so sensitive to the world, essentially having a conservative touch, wanting to leave things as they are in so much as possible, except insofar as his survival and the survival of his people depends on it, she thinks that foolish, because how much greater progress can be made if we more skillfully, more scientifically, more technologically exploit things and engineer society in such a way that everyone has their piece. And so she says to him, Samba Diallo, Lucienne said, the milk you drank at the breast of Diallobé country is very sweet and it's very noble. Get incensed any time someone contests it, and set right any cretin who doubts you because you're black. But know this, the more tender the mother, the sooner the time comes to push her away. Samba Diallo looked Lucienne straight in the eyes and, his heart thumping, slowly articulated, I believe I prefer God to my mother. So for Lucienne, all this about, everything he said about his relationship to nature is naive. It's not workable in the modern world. The Industrial Revolution has come. The scientific revolution is past. For her, there's it's childish naivety to think that you can live, the world can continue and live the way that Samba's suggesting. To her, that's still hearkening back to the world bred in tooth and claw, where misery and lack are the norm. For Samba, this is not just something specific to his country, though. This is deep in him. This is religious. They are butting heads at the point of fundamental worldview, fundamental assumptions. Well, their last time they spend together is when they go out on a boat on a lake. And this is that scene. Suddenly, in the middle of the current, Samba Diallo stopped rowing and leaned back comfortably. Across from him, at the other end of the boat, Lucienne, stretched out with her face to the sun, seems to be sleeping. He took a deep breath, stretched, regarded the sky, and smiled. I would have liked the heat of the sun to soften all of a sudden, the sky to turn a bit bluer, the water of the river to run faster and make more noise. The universe all around ought to sparkle. Lucienne, isn't it possible? When I was a child, I was the master of all of this. I got new mornings whenever I wanted them. What about you? She had opened her eyes wide and watched him, though without budging. Never. Except when I went out into the countryside, and still, I just got enhanced mornings. Never ones like you're depicting. A long silence followed. Tell me, Lucienne, don't laugh at me today. Even if I look absurd to you, don't laugh. This day, I want to dive into me, into the deepest part of me, with no reserve. I want so badly to know if I only dreamed of all that joy that I remember, or if it was real. I won't laugh. What joy? The scenery is the same. It's this same house that encloses the sky more or less blue, and earth more or less alive. The water flows in it, the trees grow in it, and men and beasts alive. And men and beasts live in it. The scenery is the same. I recognize it still. She sat up and rested her elbows on the edge of the boat. What joy? She asked again. Lucienne, this scenery, it's fake. Behind it are things 1,000 times more beautiful, 1,000 times more true. But I can no longer find the way to that world. In the last scene, they'd kind of bumped heads propositionally in a discussion about this. In this scene, we get it sort of much more depicted, much more on an emotive level. First of all, the whole scenery of being a boat on the water is already hearkening back to something that Samba's father said to the French schoolmaster when he said, the West is obsessed with the exterior of a thing, that which is visible to the senses, that which can be empirically tested. He said, the evidence carries you like a boat across the surface of things. It also exiles you to the surface. And so here we are on the water. Water, rivers, river earlier was the place that was sort of hearkening to the voice of Samba's ancestors. The river is the place at the end of the book which brings sort of a reconciliation and unity between faith and reason, a return to peace. And so here we have Samba in France with his communist would-be girlfriend, and he is confined to the boat above the surface of the water. He no longer has access to the depths. He wants to dive down, but here we have him floating across the surface of things, being now exiled to seeing it as scenery, where before, as we talked about in the very first one of these, when we talked about domicide and the meaning crisis, for ancient peoples and for non-Western peoples in a lot of places still, material is not the most real thing. There's a reality beneath and beyond all things. You see a physical image of me, and you recognize me by my facial features or my voice, but there is depth and a meaning and a pattern across time. Even my wife, who knows me best, there's a depth to me she does not know. We sort of, we deny this in people when we call them NPCs, but we acknowledge this sometimes in our most beloved people or in our heroes. And for others, this depth extends to all things. So, simply a tree carries so much meaning and symbology and age and experience that we can hardly begin to comprehend. But to science, it's a, carefully genetically organized amalgam of cellulose and lignins, and it can be reduced to its physical parts. Water is H2O, rather than water is a world of experience and meaning that we live through life, from the water of the womb to the water of the breast milk, the water of the river, the water of the rainstorm, the water of the ocean, and so on. But yes, Samba is lamenting the fact that he's been trained now by the West, by his exposure to and immersion in the West, to sort of being stuck in the boat. I'm sure there's more to say about that, but there's no reason to extend things too long. So after Lucienne kind of fades out of the story, Samba grows a little closer with a man. Oh my goodness, what is his name? Pause recording. Excuse me, his name is Pierre-Louis, and he is a Cameroonian nobleman. And so Samba meets him, and this is a man who grew up in Cameroon and came to France as an adult. And he is a political diplomat of some kind. It's been a while now since I've read it, but he's a political diplomat of some kind, and he fights for the rights of African peoples. He fights for them to get some. Can we get a little respect here in France? Because essentially, France, while it invites colonized people to some extent enjoy the benefits of modernity through them, France shows no interest whatsoever in the riches that the world that they colonize has to offer beyond raw materials or human labor or something. They don't care about spiritual insights or the opinions of African people. Voilà. So he makes friends with Pierre-Louis, who becomes sort of the new mentor figure after the loss of the Quranic teacher back in Senegal, now in Diallobé country. Now Pierre-Louis is sort of a new figure. Pierre-Louis invites Samba to his home, and then the men, Pierre-Louis, his cousin Capitaine Humbert, and another family member of theirs, Marc, start to have a discussion sort of that revolves around the relation of Africa to the West and Samba's experience and meaning crisis that he's going through in France. So we're going to drop into the middle of the conversation for the next little excerpt. It's hard, Samba Diallo finally pronounced. Here you might say I live less fully than in Diallobé country. I don't feel anything directly anymore. You know, all of this upon reflection seems ridiculous to me. It could be, after all, that more than for my country, what I have sorrow for is my childhood. Still, tell us how your nostalgia manifests. It seems that in the land of the Diallobé, man is nearer to his death, for example. He lives in greater familiarity with it. His existence acquires from it a boost in authenticity. There exists an intimacy between her, death, and me, made of both my terror and my expectation at the same time. Whereas here, death has become like a stranger to me. The whole fight, that being the scientific revolution, the Lucienne's fight to subject nature, to control our destiny, technologically, the whole fight drives it back far from our bodies and minds. I forget about it. When I go looking for it in my thoughts, I see only a desiccated feeling, an abstract eventuality, hardly more disagreeable to me than to my insurance company. In sum, Mark said, laughing, you were complaining about no longer living your death. Everyone laughed. Samba Diallo did too, acquiescing. It still seems to me that in coming here, I've lost a world of privileged awareness. Back then, the world was like my father's dwelling to me. Everything carried me to the most essential part of itself. The world was not silent or neutral. You might read, dead matter. The world was not silent or neutral. It was alive. It was aggressive. It was soft around the edges. No scholar has ever had anything close to the knowledge that I had then of being. After a short silence, he added, here now the world is silent, and I don't resound anymore. I'm like a punctured balafon, like a dead musical instrument. I feel like nothing touches me anymore. You'll recall that a balafon is the gourd xylophone that we saw early on in the conversation between the chronic schoolmaster and the village chief, the Diallobé chief. And we saw there in the chronic schoolmaster's metaphor that he said the gourd takes on weight, and then its joy is to be as empty as possible, and it is moved and resonates with the air that moves it. So we harken back again to another metaphor from earlier in the book, as Samba feels that he is a gourd that has been perfectly well emptied out, but is also punctured and cannot serve its purpose, can no longer resonate when the wind blows it. Where is this? No scholar has ever had anything close to the knowledge that I had then of being. This, I don't think I've talked in depth. Okay, in the first episode, we talked about domicide, and Dr. John Vervaeke we read an excerpt from a paper of his about domicide, the death of the home. John Vervaeke talks about the 4 ways of knowing. There is propositional knowing, which is basically facts. I can lay it out. This is a pen. Pen's right. Water is made up of 2 hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom bound at XYZ polarity. Propositional knowledge. There's participatory knowledge, which is, procedural is next. Procedural knowledge, knowing how to do something. Ride a bike, drive home. You can do these things without thinking about them propositionally. You don't have to think, I continue down the street 200 meters and then I turn left. Your cell phone knows how to direct you home propositionally. You know how procedurally. You're doing all kinds of things that you could not articulate specifically. Everybody knows how to turn a bike, but people don't explicitly articulate. You have to turn right a little bit in order to get the left lean to turn left. You don't even know that. People assume you just turn left. Anyway, propositional knowledge, procedural knowledge. There's perspectival knowledge, which is the knowledge of what it's like to be in a certain place, position, role, perspective. I have the perspectival knowledge of what it's like to be Gideon's dad. And therefore, in more general terms, what it's like to be a dad. And you can try to imaginatively put yourself into that role to understand some things about what it feels like and what that experience would do to you. Perspectival knowledge, you can see how that's different from procedural, propositional knowledge. And then there's participatory knowledge, which is the knowledge of relationship and doing with, belonging to. I have perspectival knowledge about what it's like to be Ellen's husband. I also have participatory knowledge of what it is like to, or what it means to be a married couple and do life together in that fashion. I have participatory knowledge of what it is like to be part of a Moravian church worship service, and so on. I know what it is like to walk across the stage with my classmates at graduation. What Samba has claimed here is that Western scholarship is really interested in propositional knowledge first and foremost, procedural knowledge to an extent, but perspectival and participatory knowledge are more or less excluded, ignored, and undervalued. And he says, participatory knowledge. Adam knew Eve, and she she conceived and gave birth to a son. Knowing something, that's participatory knowledge, where it's like in Spanish, saber conocer, savoir connaître. No scholar has ever had anything close to the knowledge that I had then of being. Samba knew being on a participatory, a perspectival level, an interpersonal level. Scholars know things about being, or how things work, but it is not an interactive, it is not a relational knowing. That for Samba, is what his upbringing had, and what the West is, on the whole, missing. At least his elite education in the West is missing. Because the West is huge, but the driving, ruling force is this scientific, progressivist conquering of nature. And that is all for today. I think we've got two left. So, yeah, 2 pages left. All right. I've enjoyed this. I'm noticing more things about this book as we go through it. How some of the metaphors are coming back up I didn't notice at the time. And I look forward to next time. Bye-bye.